welcome to Pause for Payments with Kristy. I'm Kristy Duncan, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome here today Ruxandra Aldea, who's with Finastra in Canada at one of the world's largest fintech firms. Finastra supports financial institutions around the world with solutions for retail banking, transaction banking, lending, and treasury and capital markets. Welcome, Ruxandra.
Hello, Kristy, and likewise, it's my pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks so much. So today's topic is banking for Gen Z. What drives payments for the next generation? Can we start just by defining what do we mean by Gen Z?
Yeah, sure. So Gen Z, to get on the same page, are those born between 1995 and 2013. To put it into perspective, they are the children of Gen X and they are the grandchildren of baby boomers. And the reason why this is important to understand is because both Gen X as mom and dad and the baby boomers as grandma and grandpa will play actually a great influence in the life choices of Gen Z, and especially when it comes to banking.
Oh, gotcha. So what makes Gen Zers different from other demographics?
My personal interest in this specific topic is because of the fact that I actually have two children who fall within Generation Z with ages of 8 and 12. And I spent a great amount of time observing them, but also their circles of friends, also my friends who have children in the same age group. And Kristy, what I wanted to do for you today is, just to add more evidence and more color to our discussion, I actually went out and I did some primary user research with several Gen Z personas, both in North America and Europe, as well as leaders of financial institutions and leaders of fintechs that provide banking products and services for Gen Z. So this serves as the foundation for what I'm going to share with you here today.
I love it, Ruxandra. That is awesome. So I'm really, really curious now. So based on your research and your findings, can you tell us what makes Gen Z different from other demographics?
Yes, sure. So I will start with saying, and we all know that Gen Z were born wired. They've been holding tablets and game consoles in their hands since their early childhood years. Before I go through the facts from my research, I wanted to share a personal story with you. And as you know, Kristy, as I'm a fintech passionate, I've been in the space for 15 years. And I also wanted to allow my children to lean into what I do. So they hear me talking about fintech, about bank accounts, credit cards all the time. And they know this so well that actually they can flawlessly recite the top 10 banks in the US, the top 5 banks in Canada. And I wanted to do a test with my younger one day, and he's 8 years old. And I said, Adrian, can you please help me understand what is a bank from all you know? And he came to me and he said, Mom, a bank is the place where you get money online.
Oh, too funny.
This is what intrigued me to actually go out there and say, well, what do others within this generation think? So now that I've shared my story, let's get to the facts as to what makes this generation different. And so the number one thing that I would highlight is obviously their virtual world. And I've looked at their virtual world in 3 ways: the way they connect, the way they entertain themselves, and the way they learn and discover. And in terms of the way they connect, they do it through 3 of their most favorite social media apps. And you might have heard about them: Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram. And they use a lot of FaceTime on the iPhone to talk to their friends. the way they entertain themselves is Netflix. They are heavy Netflix watchers, but also they live in a world of virtual games, whether it's individual games or multiplayer games. And games like Fortnite and Minecraft, they have such large player communities that are not just for the sake of playing, but for the sake of socializing as well. And finally, how do they learn is the first source of information when they want to get an answer to a question is YouTube. And they go and I'm going to YouTube and I'm going to find the answer. And more recently, also Google Scholars is one of the virtual sources that they use for learning. And that's more prevalent, I would say, in the high school and student populations.
Wow. Well, I guess Google Scholar is especially relevant now in this COVID-19 environment where so many kids are learning from home and being homeschooled one way or another. So I'm sure that's a really useful and relevant tool.
Definitely.
So I love this. So these are really interesting things about the Gen Z. Can you tell me how youth see this environment and this outlook from their perspective? How does that impact the way they bank, do you think?
Yes, sure. So one of the other highlights of this generation that I wanted to bring up that actually ties into the way they bank is they have a strong desire to make an impact to the planet and its people. And I'd say that this desire is a lot more pronounced than it is in other generations. And for example, if you talk to them, corporate social responsibility is a big thing for them. Mm-hmm. And because universities these days actually do give more airtime to talk about issues such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But even at the high school level, I was impressed that there's actually a lot of awareness and quest for socially responsible companies, products, and companies that lead with an impact mission and vision. For example, organizations and social enterprises such as Me2We at we.org, there is a high level of awareness about their mission to create products and services that are good for the planet and good for humanity. And they like those offerings, and an organization like Me2We even allows you to track your impact when it comes to the way you shop, the way you travel, and the way you donate. So one of the key aspects for organizations is to be able to be fully transparent with Gen Z when it comes to their corporate social responsibility and their sustainability goals. And that is definitely a way to engage with them and align with their values and beliefs. I do think that this trend of wanting to live with an impact is continuing from the millennial generation, and I do see Gen Z actually becoming a catalyst for the business world, including banking, to actually increase the amount of time, effort, and investments into corporate social responsibility, to the point where the triple bottom line measurement, where reporting is not just for financial purposes, but it also becomes reporting for people, for planet, in addition to profits.
So these are all really interesting observations, Ruxandra, and I love the way you've really segmented it down into the way they learn, the way they communicate, and the way they play. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think the Gen Z, how they bank and what makes that different from other generations?
Yes, sure. And, I'm going to respond to this, Kristy, from a threefold perspective in terms of how they view banks, how they like to be serviced by banks and financial institutions, and also back to our discussion on sustainability, how they like to direct their savings and their money. So I'm going to address those three aspects, which I believe are important in impacting the way they bank.
Sounds
So
good.
we'll start with the first one in terms of how Gen Z views banks. And you know, what amazes me about this generation is how mature they are. They are very responsible and serious about money management, about financial matters. And they are very self-aware that high schools or universities don't prepare them enough with the right knowledge, financial education, and tool sets to help them move towards early adulthood. In terms of their view on banks, the same mission critical ingredient of trust applies in terms of how they view banking relationships. The same it applies for us. But I would say that for this generation, trust is even a bigger thing. And the reason for this is because they've lived through an unparalleled explosion of information, especially digital information in the last 15 years. And they're very careful and very cautious about what they trust and what they don't. And from this perspective, from the perspective of trust and trusting banks, I do believe there's a bit of an uphill coming up, especially for the digital challenger banks, but also even for the GAFA or the big tech, the Googles, Amazon, Facebooks, and Apples, who are all eyeing banking. And just because they don't yet have the brand equity or the trust as banking brands. So they still have, I believe, a long way to build that trust before Gen Z can truly believe in them as providers of financial services. The other challenge that digital banks also face is the fact that their strategies are focused on fast market share growth, and strategies such as free banking accounts actually cause some suspicion from the Gen Z because they know very well that there are no free lunches in the world.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
And so the other one, so this we covered how they view banks and the importance of trust and building that trust. The second aspect of banking that I wanted to share from my research is related to how they like to be serviced by banks. And despite the fact that they are digitally natives, that they have these inherent digital worlds that they live in, they actually value the human touch very much. And with respect to connecting with banking advisors, financial advisors, they all unanimously consider the in-person and face-to-face connection as the way to be most effective. And there is actually a premium, surprisingly, that they put on that human touch.
I love it. That's really interesting. Well, and I think that also goes back to trust. I know in Canada, we're a country of bank haters, but we always trust our banks. In fact, the government of Canada has a authentication service that goes through the banks, and we all trust our banks to authenticate ourselves to the government. So the trust is definitely there.
That is the biggest asset and an immutable one for sure. I also wanted to discuss the way they like to get service from the banks, because there are some of the behaviors that do show themselves in how they like to interact with banks. For example, this need of instant connection and 24/7 connection, given the world they grew up in, is evident in the way they expect to get service from banks. So this would be reflected in statements like, well, I want to be able to connect with my bank anytime I need to through one click. And from this perspective, there are actually banks that have implemented chat capabilities in a secure way through their mobile apps in order to meet this need. And I'll give you an example. For example, Nordea Bank, which is one of the largest banks in Northern Europe, that they actually provide the instant chat type of capability, and even more in a 24/7 type of a context, which is quite impressive.
Indeed, indeed. So those are all really good points, Ruxandra. Are there other ways that you see Gen Z differs from previous generations in terms of how they like to interact with and have relationships with their banks?
Yes, I will go back to their concern for sustainability. One of the ways that their sustainability concern is reflected is in how they park their money. And they want to basically put their money and see their money going from an investment perspective, going into companies that support social or environmental goals and programs. And so what this does, it's going to lead to an influx of money into the so-called socially responsible investments, of which there are already 26 trillion. So the secret sauce here will be for financial institutions to be able to screen these types of investments, to create offerings for socially responsible investments for this generation, but also they need to be able to present them in a way that's easy to understand, transparent, and more importantly, credible to qualify as a socially responsible investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole concept of greenwashing comes through here because I think the Gen Z, sounds like the Gen Z will see through that fairly quickly if they're not totally authentic and transparent about the green products and the ESG products that they offer.
Absolutely.
So these are all great observations from a financial institution perspective. This opens up, I think, some new opportunities for them. Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of opportunities there might be for FIs and how you recommend they might take a look at this new demographic?
Yes, for sure. So the opportunity to engage with the Gen Z is twofold. First of all, it starts with understanding them and engaging with Gen Z for the purpose of designing relevant banking experience. It has to look more like dating rather than selling, because we discussed that Gen Z have grown up to be largely exposed to a lot of sales and marketing online, and they are really highly cautious about anything that sounds too much like it's sales or profit driven. So the understanding has to come from a genuine desire to know them, and then they'll open up and then they'll share with you. They'll share their needs. They again learned about the various degrees of quality and credibility of data sources, even through their school years. So again, they'll be cautious and they'll want to know that you are engaging with them in an empathetic way, in a way with a genuine desire to get to know them versus sell them. One of the equally important ways to engage with Gen Z is to actually engage with Gen X, a mom and dad, but also baby boomers, grandma and grandpa, because this is who they are going to believe and trust when it comes to what bank accounts to open, where, what credit cards to get or not. And this is unlike the influence of friends or social media for other commodity products like clothing or entertainment. They will listen and they will take the guidance of Gen X and baby boomers. And I think from a grandpa and grandpa perspective, the other thing to remember is that because of the wealth transfer that is happening right now from that generation and some of the successors being Gen Z, it's important to recognize grandma and grandpa are going to start, and I see them funding the education of Gen Z. So as such, they will have a big influence as to where the money sits in that generational wealth transfer.
Fabulous. And this all makes a lot of sense. So really the banks need to take a bigger picture and not just focus on the Gen Z, but focus on their key influencers, which will be ultimately a generation or two prior, being their parents and grandparents, which is also important from an investment perspective and a wealth management perspective. Awesome. So can you tell me, you're in the market all day, every day, Ruxandra, and you've got a firsthand knowledge of this. Are there organizations that you see that are standout examples of connecting and really engaging with this Gen Z demographic?
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to provide some examples from overseas because I always believe in, looking outside of the North American continent and stealing some of those great ideas. Why not bring them into our markets here in Canada and the US? So one of such banks that stands out is BBVA. It's obviously a global tier one bank. And what I like is they have a strong and religious almost focus on education. They have, vast resources and investments in the BBVA Center for Financial Education and Capabilities that takes learning to great heights in terms of formats and resources for all ages. But what intrigues me about BBVA is the concept of responsible banking, with a true desire to educate at the same time. So for example, for their first-time home buyers and first-time mortgage borrowers, they would get them to go through a test that they have to pass in order to make sure that they understand what it takes to manage life and finances when you have a mortgage. And I think that is an absolute great way to instill that trust that Gen Z needs.
Wow, I love it. That's
and,
really...
Of course, there are a couple of other banks, and the audience here can search them online. I won't spend too much time, but one is, Union Bank, for example, that are providing a digital app called Yubi, more as a gamified app. So it's not with real money. It's a game. It's a financial game to teach children of their clients about earning money, spending money, and saving money. But there are also banks that provide these digital apps with real money. And one such bank, again, going overseas in a market which I love for its, foresight and creativity, is Australia. So there's CommBank in Australia. Again, the audience can look it up on the web and find out a lot more than what I'm sharing here. But they have a really cool youth app with real money that has an actual and a real bank account behind it that obviously parents can access, control, and kids can have access to understand their spending. But also they have a great reward scheme where kids can be given choruses around the house and they can earn money for that. And many other, I'd say, gamified learning experience about money. Again, all with the goal of increases the overall financial knowledge of Gen Z.
I love these foreign influences. There's a lot of creativity going on in banks around the world, and I love that so much of it is there to support, engage, and educate this next generation of potential investors and savers and borrowers as well. I want to move on a little bit.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to move on, Ruxandra, and talk a little bit about the COVID-19 environment that we're in today, and we might expect to see higher than usual or underemployment rates with the Gen Z in particular. Can you tell me why is it important for financial services and players to really engage with this market when they might not be as lucrative a market in the short run? Do you have any insights there?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous question. I would say that the reason why Gen Z is an important audience for banks to start researching, engaging with, and understanding how they can provide banking experience to this audience is number one, because of the current wealth transfer that is happening from the baby boomers. And it's estimated that by 2043, there will be $68 trillion that will change hands. And a lot of this money will go to the successors of baby boomers. And Gen Z will be part of the baby boomer succession plans. So while we discussed that Gen Z are heavily influenced by their moms and dads and grandma and grandpa, so banks will land Gen Z as clients in this generational transfer. However, to keep them as clients, to increase the lifetime value as they move into adulthood years, they need to start understanding how to align themselves and how to understand this generation in order to provide meaningful experiences as they move into those adulthood and maturity years. The other reason that it's important to look at Gen Z is from an employment perspective, and more the perspective of Gen Z as employees, because Gen Z provide banks with the opportunity to have that user innovator type of persona on staff, because Gen Z know what it's like to walk in their shoes. They'll be more likely than others to be able to see challenges and solutions that others may not see. So it gives banks an opportunity to bring innovative employees that understand themselves and can create solutions for themselves. And finally, as they start their early employment years, they're actually the largest cohorts. They are going to hit employment, especially in the next couple of years. So it's estimated that they will also become big spenders from a consumer perspective. So the estimated spend from this generation is $143 billion, which is going to present great opportunities from an e-commerce and payments innovation perspective.
Wow, that's fabulous, Ruxandra. It's really interesting to see this generation not only as consumers of banking products and potential investors, but also as potential employees, because clearly if you get the employees talking to that generation, they're the ones who are going to best understand that whole customer experience and customer journey. That's fantastic. So to bring this around full circle, we started by talking about fintech and where you work and where our industry is right now. Let's tie off this discussion by getting back to the fintechs. And the fintechs in many ways underpin, like that financial technology underpins what so much of the banks and financial institutions do. Are there some insights you can share with us on how you see fintechs supporting this new Gen Z and the financial services players in the market?
Sure. So I think that the best role that fintechs can play in terms of value added in this market is the role of innovators. And I'm saying this probably even more so than the banks themselves, specifically to be able to create solution concepts to meet the needs of Gen Z. And the reason why I believe that is in traditional banks, business cases related to Gen Z could be rather difficult, especially if the return on investment or the project, the expected project results are looked at from a shorter time horizon perspective. Because let's look at it that Gen Z mortgages and investments, they will still take several years to come as Gen Z reaches that stage in their lives. So potentially business cases and opportunities related to the Gen Z in banks may get overshadowed by other projects, especially if the returns are looked at from a profitability and revenue perspective, or other projects may get prioritized higher if the return is sooner or within a shorter time frame. But I think this is also going to be different for banks that serve mass affluent, or high net worth clients, because we talked about the generational wealth transfer. And from a baby boomer perspective, banks that deal with segments in that mass affluent, and high net worth clients will probably put a lot more focus on Gen Z, creating banking experience for them, because they know they will inherit good fortunes, and they will want to create strategies and products and services to keep them engaged and to keep them happy, and obviously to grow their share of wallet through their adulthood years.
Wow, so lots of opportunity with this generation, Ruxandra. I love your insights. I love how you've addressed it from the banks and financial institutions perspective, like getting to know and understand and take a real interest in this new generation and offer them things that really helps to build the relationship, almost like a partnership, to help them grow as they grow their careers, grow their families, and ultimately inherit wealth from prior generations. I also like the way that you engaged with them, with some of their key influencers being some of the earlier generations, their parents and grandparents who are trusted advisors to them. I love the concept of the education, and that really goes to helping to strengthen that relationship, because the banks are strategically interested in their success, and that really providing that investment of education from the banks to the Gen Z is, I think, in the long term, really going to reap great dividends. I also love the perspective of looking at Gen Z not only as potential customers, but as potential employees. And again, that becomes another partnership that can be honed over the years, and will help the banks to be more successful in the market. So thank you so much for taking the time, Ruxandra, to share these fantastic perspectives on the Gen Z and where they are and where the potential opportunities are for financial institutions and fintechs as they become a bigger and more important demographic for financial services providers. I've really enjoyed our conversation, as I'm sure the rest of our audience will as well.
And thank you, Kristy. I'm very thankful for being here today with you and your team. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to encourage all of our audience to join us online for the many other Pause for Payments with Kristy webinars that we're hosting with inspirational leaders like Ruxandra around the global payments ecosystem. And thank all of you for joining us here today.